Michael and myself, we are from Gemalto. It's a digital security company. We have heard other talks from this company at this venue as well. To give you a little overview of what the company is, you may not have heard of it because it's more business-to-business company. So it's more like Intel that it was about maybe 20 years ago when they started putting stickers on the laptops which says Intel inside. So you can think of as Gemalto as we should have stickers which says Gemalto inside because we are in quite a few areas. In fact, I'm sure that some of you, in fact, most of you would have a product that is from Gemalto that you're using. So if you're using a smartphone, we have a SIM card in it. If you're using your US passport for travel, we have a chip which is inside that passport. If you're using a banking card, then we have a chip inside that banking card as well. So there's a lot of areas that we work with. In the area that Michael and I are involved in, we are part of a team which is looking at identity and access management. And we're looking at how collaborative work can be done with other players in this arena. So that's the overall view of this talk. So that's why we say it takes a village to get security right, because our feeling is that it's not possible to get security done by a single company. I mean, maybe 20 years ago it was the case, but now the sheer breadth of what areas security touches, it's getting harder and harder. And as we go through the talk, you'll be able to see what we mean by that, because we'll touch on different areas of security and what each company is bringing to it. So with that said, let's look at the rough agenda for the talk. So I'll go and give a little introduction to set the stage to what we are talking about. Talk about IAM, talk about authentication, give you a little background. And then Michael will come in and he'll look at the building blocks for how we think that things can be done when we do collaborative work. So we'll show how one particular area of work has been done with collaboration with two other companies. So we'll explain that in a bit more detail. After going through the building blocks, then we'll look at a few demos. And then we'll go and explain those demos in a bit more detail to see how they were put together and what is the actual, the details and the nuts and bolts behind it. And then finally, we'll take an even broader view at what the collaboration is. And I'll explain one particular identity alliance that we are part of, which has made all of this happen. So with that said, let's look at the introduction for IAM. So I'll start at a very high level. We'll say, okay, well, what do you mean by identity and access management? So at the very outset, you may say, okay, well, there are 4 things that I want to touch on. And each of these are things that you have been familiar with. You've read about them, you've known about them, but it's always good to look at them from a different perspective. So the first one is that passwords are weak. Now, I don't think anybody in the IT industry would say that that's not true. So, I mean, we start with the assumption that yes, I mean, passwords have been weak, and they certainly are now. And in order to do the authentication correctly, you have to augment them with additional factors. And we'll touch on that a little bit as what those additional factors are. Now, with that said, let's go to the second realization that people have come up to. And this is something which is more recent than the realization that passwords are weak. And this one is that when you do authentication, it's not enough to just do that at the perimeter. You have to do that in each and every step. And when I say each and every step, it is that step which is critical. So whatever is critical in your flow, whatever is critical in any transaction that you're doing, in whatever your software is working on, that step has to be protected. I mean, when I think of it, the analogy could be that, okay, well, you get up in the morning, you take your kid to the daycare center, and you drop him or her there. And then you come in the evening, and basically you pick up your child. So you've done your part in making sure that the kid is safe as you drop him or her at the daycare center and then pick him up in the evening. But what happens during the day? So similarly, if you were able to monitor each and everything that the kid is doing, is the kid sleeping on time in the afternoon? Is he having the right nutrition when they're feeding him lunch? So all of those things are precise things that the access management can do in terms of the analogy on what we see over here. The third thing is the concept of adaptive authentication. Now, in the past, there's always been a tug of war between whether to make security really bulletproof, and people have done that. I mean, Gemalto has been in that business of doing that. I mean, we were a company which was the leader in smart cards. Now, the use of smart cards is extremely secure. Nobody doubts that. The question is it usable? And there, we always get into a territory which says that, okay, well, in some cases, it's absolutely must to have it. In other cases, maybe not. And the question of when to use which authentication method or which security method is what is referred to as the adaptive authentication. And one example of that could be let's say you go to the bank, and the teller says, okay, well, in order to deposit an amount, I would need a stronger authentication method. So show me 2 forms of ID. Whereas if you're depositing, so it's basically for the withdrawal of the money. In case you were depositing a check, then maybe just one ID is enough. So it depends upon exactly what is the scenario in which you are using that. Finally, another concept which is gaining really strong popularity is the concept of recognition as opposed to authentication. So what users demand right now is that, okay, well, this is my laptop. Try to figure out this is me without me telling you that this is me. So this is more in line with how we approach people day to day. So when we approach somebody, we basically recognize who they are as opposed to them telling us, well, this is me. So this recognition concept, and there are ways of actually doing that, which have been made possible with the advances in AI and machine learning. Now, the way authentication works, it was important before. Now it is even more important because of the plethora of things that we can do now with the internet. Not only that we have more devices that we connect from, there are more services that we connect to. And because of that, it makes the concept of authentication, to make sure that we go beyond passwords, even more important. So the notion of multi-factor authentication, so this is a general view of, okay, what constitutes a multi-factor authentication. Now you can use a variety of things, and then you could scale them saying that, okay, well, on this side, you have something which is a bit weak authentication, and as you move over here, generally the security increases. So that's why over here you may say, okay, well, the IP geolocation is one form. So if I'm in this location, then think that, okay, well, that adds another factor to who I am, and use that to authenticate me. Well, you are in that location, so I could say, well, I'm in this hall at LASCON, but then so are these other people who are attending this. So how do you differentiate me from the other people? All the way on the other end of the spectrum, we have biometrics and smart cards, which are again very strong forms of authentication, but that adds a second factor, which means that now you have to carry that second factor, and you have to build your infrastructure which can use that second factor in your applications. So the sweet spot is always somewhere in the middle, where you can reconcile this usability and security. So let's take another look at what we generally mean when we say multi-factor authentication. I mean, if you have one password that you log into your application, and you say, well, in order to make it more secure, I'll ask the users to have another password. So now I have 2 passwords. Well, sadly, that's not multi-factor. So multi-factor, what we imply by that is that, okay, well, something you know. Password is something you know. And not only you know, but only you know. The second one is what you have. So a smart card, some other form factor. And finally, what you are, which could be your fingerprint, which could be your iris scan, which could be your facial recognition, as we see now with the new incarnation of iPhones. So this has been the classical way of how we have defined multi-factor authentication. What is also coming into vogue now, which I would term as supplementary forms of multi-factor, which means that you don't use them by themselves, but you combine them with what you have traditionally done with any of the other ones. And what those are, so geolocation comes in. So again, this is something that we talked earlier, that by itself, it's weak. But now when you combine it with other factors, sure enough, it will have value. What things are around you? So let's say I go to the office, and I log in, and around my PC, I have a Bluetooth mouse. I have my phone, which is always right next to it. And if your application could detect that, that could be used as another factor to make it easy for the user to log in. The behavior. So BehavioSec is a company that basically made a big splash in the financial industry when they said that, okay, well, they could monitor the pattern of how you type. So if I give one of you my password and you type that in, the system will say, aha, this is not Asad, even though the password is the same. And they determine that based upon how you use the keys and the separation of timing between one key and another. And of course, a combination of all of these. Now, with that said, we said, okay, well, the passwords are weak and things have been moving, but saying that password is weak is not a new thing. In fact, back in 2014, when Bill Gates was addressing the RSA conference in San Francisco, that's the declaration that he made, that passwords are dead. And that was 14 years ago. And by the way, Microsoft is still making that declaration because Michael was there at Ignite last month, and they're still saying that the era of password is over. But it has taken 14 years, and still we are talking about the same thing. Now, having said that, it could be that now we are turning a page. because there are ways of, let's say, Windows 10 is coming out where you can have Windows Hello, then you have Microsoft Authenticator, and similarly other companies have authenticators. So Zomato has an authenticator that we use, which is on your mobile. And then finally, the introduction of FIDO. So FIDO has been around for about more than 5 years now, but again, things may be, the stars may be aligning at this stage. Now, in terms of SAML, I would want to take you through a flow of why SAML is important. So for instance, we talked about authentication, and that gives you a strong authentication, whether it's with multi-factor combination or with behavior sec or other things, but that's a one-to-one pairing. If you want to do the authentication for SAML as to why that is needed, let's look at how the world was before the SAML came into being. So now you have the flow where the user belongs to a company, Acme, and they have a password to log in. And the company says, well, by the way, we have an online service that you can use to log in. And the user goes over here, and guess what? They have to use another password over here. So the user would say, I've gone from 1 password to 2 passwords, and as 10 more service providers are added, I'll have 10 more passwords to remember. So the problem is that on the user side, too many credentials. For the company, there's no control. So the user leaves the company, they still have an account over here. How do you monitor that? Now, of course, the IT administrator can go on the back and delete that, but that's an extra work that they don't want to take. For the service provider, they don't want to deal with passwords or any form of credential because the users forget them, which means that now they have to have a reset mechanism. There could be a data breach, in which means that now they are on the hook to see what happens with those. So in this scenario, all the 3 players are unhappy. So that's the problem that SAML solves. By putting an identity provider in the middle, the user goes to the IDP, gets a token, uses that token to log on everywhere that they want. So that's where the SAML scenario comes in. And the same thing you could do, instead of going to the IDP first, you could go to the service provider, and then the same redirection flow can happen, and now you log in. Now for the IAM, this takes you to a level of, in a nutshell, what we mean by IAM is, what do I have access to? Which application? So now we're not just talking about authentication. Once you've done the authentication, what things can I do? Which applications? Where can I access them from? Can I access them from my office? Can I access them from my home? And how often do I need to authenticate? Which means that after 4 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, the access is revoked, which means I have to re-authenticate. So all these factors that you put in, that gives you that final control over the access management. So the same analogy of not dropping your child to the daycare, but constantly monitoring what is happening at the daycare throughout the day. That's access management. Now, at the same time, we can extend it by privileged access management, which essentially combines the computers, users, and behavior, and then basically assigns them privileges based upon what they are going to do. And we'll show you one example of what we mean by PAM over here. So with that said, let me hand over to Michael to take you through what building blocks are there, and then we'll go into the demo. So Michael.
Thank you, Asad. So moving into the building blocks. So we've already discussed in the previous slides that Asad presented these components, single sign-on, access management and MFA, and PAM. And we wanted to have a situation where these components were utilized in a system. But we didn't want that system to be just from a single provider. We wanted to reach out to the village of suppliers that we have access to try and form an integrated solution which uses more than one supplier to prove that the actual communication protocols, the protocols we're using, the SAML information can be used to exchange data and not have to have a proprietary solution that solves all your problems. So the companies that we actually found in our village, the first was Ping Identity. They provide Ping Federate as a single sign-on solution. The next one we didn't have to look too far. That was our own solution in Gemalto. And the third one was Beyond Trust, who provide a power broker functionality for PAM. If we look into them in a little more detail, each one. So Ping Federate, they have Ping Identity have Ping Federate. It's a application that's been around for more than 10 years. It's very well used in the industry. They have most of the components that we're talking about here. They have single sign-on. They have a small amount of IAM as well, and they have a two-factor authentication, which is either provided by their own product, PingID, is a product they supply, or they integrate with third parties for that solution. We have a similar set of technologies, so we have single sign-on, IAM and 2FA as well. Ours are provided by the star component is used for access management. We have another various 2FA components varying from hardware tokens to mobile devices, the smart cards, depending on what you want to use. And that's provided by SAS, the SafeNet Authentication Service. And finally, for the PAM facilities, we reached out to Beyond Trust. They have a product called Power Broker, and that provides the translation of authenticated requests, high privileged root level authentication requests to support third-party authentication. So what we wanted to do was to integrate the Ping's SSO functionality with Gemalto's access management and 2FA, and then integrate Beyond Trust as the third provider, so that we had an integrated solution with multiple parties involved to demonstrate the fact that we can actually integrate with our competitors, and we aren't trying to tie people into a single source. So the way this flow actually works, I won't read through all of the slide, you can read through that himself, but in simple terms, once the user authenticates to an SP, in this case the demo we'll do in a few minutes will be for Salesforce, but once you authenticate to the SP, that redirects to Ping Federate as being the single sign-on provider. That information is translated to an IDP request to Star, and Star uses SAS as a mechanism for which it authenticates using the third-party application, in our case through MobilePass Plus application on the mobile phone. And then the flow works its way backwards, where the authentications are passed back, and Ping actually sends a SAML response back to Salesforce. So if I actually go through a demo of what that actually looks like in practice, so I'll do the scenario one of the SP1. So hopefully I've been careful to not affect the demo gods here by actually having this not as live, but actually as a movie. So let's try and see if this actually flows through successfully. So having logged onto Salesforce, we're connecting to Ping Federate. This dialog is actually Ping's dialog, but we asked it to use our provider, the SafeNet Trusted Access, will authenticate with a user ID and click login. At this point, we're not actually parading a passcode. We're actually sending a push notification out to the mobile device on the right. So on the right, we'll see a notification appearing on the screen, which we approve, and there's a biometric fingerprint. Once that happens, it will transfer back automatically onto the server side, and you're authenticated into the solution. So it's quite an easy flow for the user. They don't really have to know what's going on in the background. Things just work. But there's actually quite a lot of complexity going on in the background, and we'll show you some of the configuration in a later slide. So the next scenario is, in this case, the authentication is going to use Power Broker, where we're trying to step up authentication for specific commands. So things like adding a user, or deleting a user, or those kind of operations which normally require root access. In this example, when you authenticate to the console, because you're actually either connecting either to a Linux box, so we have both Linux and Windows applications. Most of the authentication for one is actually the same as the previous example, so we're actually here looking at more of the integration of the step-up part. So in this case, the authentication is logged in with least privilege, so they don't get all the facilities that they need. The user then tries to elevate and try and do a command that normally the system will reject. It sends the request out. In this case, it's using Radius rather than SAML. It can use SAML. It's just in this example, we wanted to do multiple different authentication mechanisms. That then causes the system to return back another authentication request to the mobile device and a push notification. Once that's accepted, the response is returned to either accept or deny that authentication request, depending on whether the user accepted or denied the request. So we'll look at that in a Linux environment first. So again, hopefully, this is going to, oop, nope, demo gods affected me. Try that again. No, it's not working. I knew I shouldn't have attempted the demo gods. What's going on? Okay, let's click play. Aha, success. So, at this stage, we're logging in with a password only into the actual console. We're typing a command which is identifying who the user is. It's identified as a non-root based user. PB run is a promotion application which actually promotes the user. At this point, they didn't type a password. It asked just to send a message, which translated into a mobile pass request message coming back. We approve, perform the identification, and the user, when we get the response back, is now identified as root. So, again, trying to do a privilege command, add user. This user doesn't already exist. The permission was denied. It says you're not allowed to run this command. We'll just check to see whether that command actually did succeed in the background. And when we try and look at the password database, there is no user for that particular ID. So if you promote again, if you do the PB run, so this isn't doing single sign on this stage. It's not. All it's doing is every time you run this command, you need to authenticate. So it isn't trusting the logged on user. Every single operation that needs to be authenticated as a step up requires an authentication. So again, we didn't type a password. We just said use the external device to be our factor. And as long as we approve and provide the biometric fingerprint, then we get through and the user, well, there's no actual command response to this, but we can prove that the user was created by repeating the cat command to see that now we do indeed have a user in our database. So the Power Broker also works on Windows. So if you try and do a demonstration with the Windows environment, we're going to run regedit. So in this command, we're running regedit command. At this point, Power Broker provides us a GUI for telling us to authenticate as a higher level, as the root level or as the Windows administrator. We're asking for the system again to send out a request to the third-party application, which again we approve with a fingerprint, and it responds back with a message box which wasn't centered, unfortunately. I have to reassign the positioning. But now you see regedit is now actually visible to us, and we can actually do whatever commands we need to do within regedit. So in terms of how we actually hooked all of this up, each of these applications has a GUI, a portal. They're all web-based. So this is Ping Federate's page, the portal they have for authenticating. In this case, it's the IDP connection. So we can see we're configuring within the existing Ping product the IDP connection. What we did was we actually took their installer and installed it on our own server. Ping Federate has the application server running on your environment. So you have to stand up your own web service and then install that product inside it. So this is actually the address that we used for our own test. We're telling it to use SAML in this particular case. And this is the site of our access management functionality. So we're configuring here what the other side of the SAML information is set to. On the next page, you'll see how we then set that up on the other side. So within STAR, SafeNet Trusted Access Platform, we again have that same reference to authenticate the entity ID that the other side is going to talk to us as, which is the same on the other side. We also indicate that we're using the SAML protocol. And further down the page, This is actually the endpoint that we referenced as being where the web app has been, the Ping Federate web app has been installed. So with that configuration, all of the SAML information is translated through that flow from the initial logon request being passed through the IDP chain of Ping Federate's configuration to the Star application. The access management part of this, so we've configured within our access management policy that when all users authenticate using Ping Federate as an application, we are going to grant access as long as there is a token-based authentication. One of the policy settings you can have here is to also do password as well, but we chose not to do that in this case. So configurations can be made here to make changes to how we want to authenticate particular users in particular scenarios. On the left, you'll see like deny outside US, deny outside network, so we can look at IP addresses, we can look at geographic locations to try and filter away people we don't want to be using this within the access policy, access management facilities. This is the Power Broker portal. So Beyond Trust's portal, you can configure, in this case it's the Linux version, how to set up which users. If you're focusing on that blue area, we'll see the users who have been identified as being able to promote, which commands they are actually allowed to promote, and how the actual configuration was established in terms of it being a Gemalto radius connection, and it promotes to root. The configuration for regedit is a separate configuration. In that, it's explaining exactly how that operation, which executable they want to be protected. Underneath the user messages, it sees that we're using Gemalto MFA. That in the background, that's actually configured to be a radius call out to our system. So with that, I'll hand back over to Asad to discuss some of the industry collaborations that were involved.
Thank you, Michael. So as you saw, this was a collaboration between three players, Gemalto, Beyond Trust, and Ping. And each of these companies was chosen because of the particular strengths that they have in a particular area of the identity and access management that we were trying to showcase. So Gemalto was picked because we wanted to say that, okay, well, we are strong in strong authentication, in multi-factor authentication, in access management. Ping was picked because the Ping Federate product that we have, it has been around for more than 10 years now. And what they're really strong in is building the single sign-on platforms that companies are using, and they have all those customers which are relying on that single sign-on. And Beyond Trust, of course, because of the PAM offer that they have with their Power Broker. So the question was, okay, did we reach out to those two companies ourselves and say, okay, let's get together and create the solution which will demonstrate an industry collaboration? The answer was no. We did not do that by ourselves. It was done under the auspices of what we call Identity Defined Security Alliance. So we have different alliances which cater to different needs of various players in the industry. And this particular one was started about 2 years ago by Ping and Optiv. And the goal of this alliance is to get together all the players in IAM field and look at what standards they are using, make sure that their components or the products that they have, they are interchangeable. And the reason for that interchangeability is obvious, because no one person or no one company can do everything that we've talked about in IAM space. And even if they try to do it, they may not be the best of breed. And the question is that when we go to the customers, well, what do the customers want? They want to pick and choose different products from different customers. And this is exactly what this alliance is trying to promote. Now, what members do we have? So right now, the members are, we have about 17 members, 17 or 18 members. Not all of them may be represented on this slide because the slide was captured a while back, and since then there have been some others that have joined. But if you are in IAM space, we would encourage you to basically contact the organizers of IDSA and be part of this dialogue that we are having and this initiative to build a more secure space for IAM products. I'll talk a little bit more about what this collaboration is doing. So when we talk about all things IAM, this is one diagram that we really like to promote in IDSA. And when you look at this side over here, so you can think about what things are important to the people. So we have identity and access management, security operations, risk management, data protection. And data protection is another field which people think that, well, it's outside what people generally associate with IAM and identity. But at some point, after authenticating, you're working with an application. That application at some point touches some data in your system. So that's why when we talk about the overall protection in the IAM space, we consider data protection as an integral part of that. So again, going back to why one company cannot do all of that, because when you look at all this analysis that we have, all these finer details of what can be done to secure products, it's much more than what one company can do. So this is an overview of what are the various topics. So if you are in any one of these areas, I mean, IDSA would be a good place for you to join. What are the things which are done in IDSA? So one thing which has been done is that there's about 13 complex use cases which have been put together, and that is done so that companies can look at those use cases and say, okay, well, is this something that I would like to do? And if it is, okay, which vendor do I go to? Well, right now the answer could be that, well, there is no single vendor that you can go to. And then what we do is that of each of those 13 use cases, we have individual companies which come together, and then they build integration solutions which demonstrate that you can do things like that by collaboration. And one example of that is what Michael just showed you, in terms of how you create a chain of trust, which is starting from single sign-on, which is doing access management, it is doing multi-factor authentication, and finally it is ending at privileged access management using PAM. So if you go to the website, I mean, there's details about what those use cases are, and of course diagrams, because unless we have flow diagrams, we engineers don't tend to pay attention. But everything is there. Now, having said that, the 13 use cases are there as an example. If you have in your company, you have some specific use cases that you want to demonstrate or work on, then those can be added in as well. Another concrete example of how this was demonstrated was that at last Identiverse conference, which is the Cloud Identity Summit conference, as it was known before, which is organized by Ping in Boston this year, these 6 use cases were demonstrated by these companies. And one example of how Zomato contributed to that was what we saw over here. So what we presented at Identiverse was very similar to what you saw over here in terms of the demonstration. So again, in terms of the specific things that you can contribute to, so on the security side, I mean, we have a range of things that your companies may be interested in. On the identity side, we have access management. We may talk about identity governance, which brings in the compliance factor to it, and then the identity administration, which is more about how do you protect the identity, but also the attributes and the user information that goes with it. So there's a whole range of nuances on how you would describe them. And in today's session, primarily what we focused on is on the security side, we looked at PAM, and on the identity side, we looked at access management. But there's a whole range of combinations that you could create, and that's why it's really important to look at what the work that IDSA is doing. Now, with that, let's think about what are the things that you could do by yourself. Now, I remember that in about early 90s when I joined Schlumberger, which is essentially a parent company of Zomato, because Zomato emerged from Schlumberger on the smart card side. The first project which I had was to automate a scripting language that we had, which we used to basically go out on the well site, and basically the measurements were done, and as the measurements were coming up, you would have applications on the surface computer which was basically taking care of that. And the graphical user interface was nice, but sometimes the engineers said that, well, I have so many other things to do that I cannot deal with the graphical nuances of where to click, especially when you have big clubs that you have. So can I write something in advance and then press a button and it would run it on the well site, which is a perfectly valid argument. So you could do that. So I joined in. I was fresh out of high school, and then joined Schlumberger to work on that. And I was given this task of actually creating that scripting language which would automate the command line interface that we had. And when I started doing that, I mean, I felt that, well, can we use something from outside the core competencies that we have? Because, I mean, writing a scripting language is not something that we were really good at. I mean, our core business was oilfield services and other system software. And we ended up using what was called tool command language, Tickle. Not sure whether you're familiar with that. It was an old language that was created. I see one nodding head. Thank you very much. So we brought in Tickle to our software library. And that was the first time that Schlumberger had used an open source software in oilfield services. Now, if I tell this story to somebody right now, they would laugh at me because now we use open source software all the time. So the collaborative spirit of developing solutions which are done by bringing in different things from different companies is now in our blood, at least in the software development side. Back then it was not. Now similarly on the IAM side, maybe 5 years ago we could have thought that okay, one company can do everything, but now it cannot. Look at all the complexities that we see over here, and it's very hard for one company to do all of that. So with that said, in terms of conclusion, that's the one thing that we would like to, I mean, if you want to take away something from this, that collaboration, collaboration, and collaboration. So we have identity, which is at the center of everything, which we realize, and we have, by following this approach, we can of course save money, the bottom line for every company. But then finally, doing it ourselves, no. So if you were in Karen's talk a while back, she was talking about doing crypto not by yourself, by using standards. So similarly over here, doing everything yourself will not work out. It's always a collaborative effort. So thank you very much.